Welcome to another episode of VG Art Review. This week we'll be talking about Antichamber, Machinarium, and Desktop Dungeons. Starting with Antichamber, it's a game that tells a story but not in the way you might typically expect. The only character present is you and a narrator, if you will, who shares only through posters with little insights into your journey. It's a game of metaphysical exploration and understanding that prefers to teach you through experience as opposed to simply being told. If you're unprepared for this, then be ready to become lost. However, even as it tells you in the very beginning, failing to succeed does not always mean failing to progress. The visuals are cleaned down to minimalistic-like theme with rectilinear edges comprising the majority of the setting. This is important in your adventure as without an attention to detail, you may be keen to miss something that leads to your progression. Speaking of progression, it is hardly any sort of linear progression that takes place, and even the idea of progression should be thought of lightly, as you're meant to focus on each experience and what you learned. What you learned this moment may be just as important now as it is later. Colors and lines are used as a guiding tool to help nudge you along in a certain direction or towards a certain detail. Occasionally an arrow might be like, hey, this way, but flow from one area to the next feels natural, even when you begin to wonder if you've gone the right way. The narrator encourages you along as you figure out a particularly challenging puzzle, because it might not be a matter of going the right way. Everything feels very unified in the sense that there were no particularly jarring areas that felt out of place. Even the menu is simply text upon the wall of the starting room. Occasionally you come across a mysterious black floating object that you only catch glimpses of through windows. No sense or clues can be made of it, however it may be something to be revealed at the end. It wasn't much to fuss over, but I did notice some artifacting on the white surfaces, but it may have been linked to my personal machine, resolution, or even recording, but largely did not affect gameplay or my immersion. I would not say that this could have been done in a different style as successfully, but its dedication and execution of the style that was delivered is excellent. Next up, we have Machinarium. Machinarium is a point-and-click adventure starring a little robot whose purpose in life isn't quite known right off the bat. Early on, you run into some old bullies you have a history with and discover they're up to some devious shenanigans. You are thrown into a holding cell, and from there on, you now understand it is up to you to stop them. It's not a game suited to those new to point-and-click adventures. Traditionally, point-and-click adventures often were drawn in pixel-style art, which made the scene simpler and thus easier to spot items which you could possibly interact with. Machinarium style has hand-drawn scenes full of detail. This isn't meant as a knock against the game as it may sound. In fact, I love how well drawn it is, and the amount of detail put into everything makes it enjoyable when studying for interactive objects. It just greatly adds to the difficulty in finding those things. The initial feel of the setting gives an impression of a post-apocalyptic scenario. However, I think it might be more accurately thought of as a city of machines built by robots. Being robots, they see primarily function. There's no need for paint and decoration, so everything is built purely for purpose. There is no verbal dialogue between robots, but instead communication is expressed through speech bubbles depicting roughly drawn images. It lends to the suggestion of a more juvenile thought pattern, maybe suggesting that the character is more a victim of circumstance than a man of action. Colors are very drab, tying back to the idea of a robot-built city. Splashes of different tones add feeling to each scene. The warm lights make it almost feel safe in the furnace room, but when you're caught by the bullies, you're thrown into a cold cell with lots of blues and rust colors. Scribbles and drawings on the wall make the place feel even less happy. Even the green of the bullies' hideout suggests something rotten or displeasing. The art direction is well thought out, and every character you feel the personality, if they are a bit flat at times. The biggest gripe I had with Machinarium is the lack of full resolution support. While it would scale the window to full resolution, the actual playing area was only a fraction of that. Scaling to full 1080p in its current state is not possible, so I would love to see the game with high resolution assets to view the drawings in their full glory. While not game breaking, it did make the game a little less enjoyable for extended playtime. And finally, we have Desktop Dungeons. Desktop Dungeons is a lighthearted dungeon crawler that focuses on efficient uses of resources and taking calculated fights. RPGs often use random odds for things like damage taken and dealt, but this is not the case for Desktop Dungeons. Fighting monsters is sort of a numbers game. You have various stats like your level, attack power, health, and mana, just as your enemies do. Your attack power is exactly how much damage you do before anything like resistance is calculated in. Health and mana recover an exact amount as you uncover tiles in a dungeon. In this way, you are able to figure out just how tough a monster you can take on, as the higher the level above you a monster is, the greater the XP bonus when killing it. Of course, you have to be careful, as a higher level monster may end up just turning the tables and taking you out. Helpful yellow lines on health mark out just how much damage would be done in a single hit, as well as how many hits it would take to kill or even be killed. You don't play as one particular adventurer, but rather are referred to as the Kingdom Administrator, as you manage all the kingdom's funds and upgrades. When going into a dungeon, you select a specific combination of class and race. In this case, I chose an orc monk, who turned out to be named Fus Tuthine. Your dungeon run is characterized with a quirky portrait, which, along with the name, is semi-randomized. The portraits are rather enjoyable, as it made me think of something I might find in a goofy version of a Dungeons & Dragons book. The enemies are limited in the beginning, but you come across a larger variety as you continue to play, and each has its own unique quirks to be learned. Despite the number of monsters, none showed any lack of attention in their own portraits, sporting a similar quirkiness, if a little bit more sinister. The icons themselves possessed a good level of detail as well. Each was easily distinguishable for what it was. Occasionally a monster might be reskinned for a subquest or task of a dungeon, but often it was easy enough to tell from the name and stats that it was different from the garden variety of the monster. Use of colors was generous, making use of a full palette. Colors are used in the level number as an indicator of difficulty based on your current level. Red level usually meant immediate death, while green would more mean a relative ease. Each dungeon took on a specific theme depending upon where the quest was taking place. I could gripe about the repetitiveness of the tiles in dungeon, but it would be an unfair accusation, as each dungeon is randomly generated and can only take on a certain level of detail and still feel contiguous. Perhaps too much variety would have made the dungeon feel overly busy and distracting. The overworld map functions as a sort of menu for upgrading your kingdom and getting to certain challenge dungeons. It may look a bit congested and busy from the video, however not all buildings are present when you start, and each building is progressively shown and introduced, giving you time to learn where everything is. It's a clever way of creating a menu without the traditional list style. Subtle highlights help differentiate between buildings while mousing around. Images too do tend to get a little fuzzy around the edges on my modest 22-inch screen, but that could be due to more of the painted style than actual texture resolution. In summary, everything is well drawn without any glaring flaws. The style is consistent and never feels too disjointed at any point. The bright contrast in dungeons and use of colors lend to a board game-like feel, perhaps suggesting that the idea of being an administrator is like managing pieces on a board. And that wraps up another episode of VG Art Review. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. Lets us know we're doing something right and lets you know when the next video comes out. If there's a particular game you want to see me take a look at, then leave it in the comments below. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.